Now, the Independent Examination Board, the IEB, has gone to court to take action against Umalusi. The legal battles is not new. In fact, it started last year in November, 2019 in November, and has stretched all across 2020. Now, Umalusi is claimed to have overcharged the IEB by almost as much as 3 million rand, and that precipitated the court action. Now, in the latest court bid against Umalusi by the IEB, the MEC of Education, Panyaza Lesufi, has thrown himself into the fray and asked for two things to happen. One, for this legal action to be drawn back by the IEB, and they need to sit around at the table and find a lasting solution. But for a second thing to happen, for the IEB to be scratched out of existence, I guess through the Constitution, as this pertains to a constitutional matter, and he seeks to address this at the ANC NGC when it does eventually happen. Now, to speak to me on this issue is the spokesperson of the MEC of Education in Gauteng, Steve Mabona. Steve, thank you so much for your time and welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Oliver, and to all our viewers.
Let's first establish the factual question here. Why is the MEC of Education under the impression that what the IEB is asking for the courts to sanction is for poor students in South Africa, poor learners, to subsidize rich learners? Where does that idea come from?
No, that idea is informed by them not wanting to pay anything, because you will understand that there's a grant that the state is, giving Umalusi. So if you were to consider that a grant is given, to Umalusi, and they will then be not paying anything, that's why the MEC says that money could be redirected, and so that you can then make sure that the poor will then benefit from the process. Because they are saying, why would the IEB not want to pay anything? Meanwhile, there's a grant that is offered to Umalusi, by the public institutions.
Steve, it doesn't seem to be the case that the IEB does not want to pay Umalusi anything for its services. It seems that the center of this contention is that the IEB claims that Umalusi had overcharged it on 3 separate invoices by R1 million on at least each of those invoices. Now, this comes not from last year, but the year before, 2019, and that is what is being litigated. Umalusi did issue the invoices. The IEB did want to pay and probably did pay, but does not want to pay the overcharges that Umalusi claims comes from a 2007 fee schedule agreement. They then later told the court, which the court dismissed, by the way, that no, this was decided in a meeting in 2015 based on a policy change that took place. So again, I'll ask, why is the MEC of Education under the impression that the IEB wants to pay absolutely nothing?
Well, he's been informed by what is at our disposal, because, like as you said, the policy decision came in 2007 for them to pay. Now, the argument is that now, why do you want to challenge the process of paying now? Because according to information at our disposal, they've been not paying anything all this time. So hence the MEC said, no, that cannot be allowed. They need to pay. And that's why he sexually suggested that they don't even need to go to court. They need to sit around the table and make sure that they agree on the money that is supposed to be paid. Because the other argument is that you don't know their financial statement, you don't know how they operate. Hence the argument to say, if you don't want to pay, but why did you then divulge your information publicly so that you can then understand on what is happening? So that's the basis which propels him to say, no, we need to challenge them. They need to make sure that they pay, because if they don't pay, that grant that we are giving to Umalusi, then it will be used for the services that, to a certain extent, they also cover some countries which are outside the South Africa.
Look, I do want to get to the more substantive question on the scrapping of the IEB out of existence. I'll get to that in a minute, but it bothers me that the detail hasn't been established quite accurately by your office, because in the court papers, in the very court papers that the MEC makes reference to, the information is outlined quite clearly that the IEB was overcharged by 600% for the first time, by the way. And they then claim that this was a decision that was reached in 2015 in a policy meeting that the CEO himself knew about, but never communicated to his legal team that represented him in court. And that is part of the reason why the High Court threw out that application by Umalusi. But let's get to the substantive question. Why does the MEC want the IEB to be scrapped out of existence when the Constitution very clearly provides for the existence of independent education boards and independent examination boards in Section 29?
Well, the feeling is that why do you have two separate entities that are, if you have Umalusi, that is making sure that you have the examination that is quality assured, that is verified, that they will make sure that the certificate, the one that is apportioned is the one that, the entire country will recognize. Why do you have two separate examination boards? So that's the argument. That's why he's saying this is bigger than the Gauteng, because you then need to go through the legislation process and submit to say this is what you think it will assist. Why do you have education that is only for the rich and the one will be for the poor? Because when they grade 12, when they leave their schools, they go to the same universities. They're going to work on the same economy. They in the same country. Those that are going outside, they must still be recognized, but their recognition will be a 12 certification, which is then verified and by Umalusi.
Steve,
so
on that matter,
that's what it's arguing.
On that matter, it seems to me that, and you once again reiterate this, that the MEC believes there is a duality where there's an education system for the rich and one for the poor. Seemingly that the independent education system would be for the rich and the public education system would be for the poor. If that is the case, why does the MEC not go after public schools in Gauteng that charge exorbitant fees and year on year raise their fees, pricing out middle class, working class and poor South Africans who live in the areas where that is the case, even when there is the opportunity for subsidies to be applied for and exemptions to be applied for, but the schools frustrate that process, making it almost impossible for poor people to get the necessary fee exemptions that exist over there. Why does this seem like a one-horse battle? Because it makes it seem as though the MEC is going after private entities and not quite fighting for the poor.
No. Don't confuse the two. Because remember, what those public schools, what they are doing, they are empowered by parents. You must understand that the SGB has the power of changing anything which will be affecting them. And the SGB represents parents. If parents in a school, they say, we think we are paying much, we need to reduce the fees, they can do that. They are empowered by the Act. The Act protects them on what is it that they want to do in their school, because SGB
but Steve,
are elected by the parents.
That isn't always the case. Sometimes it is the case that the poor in a certain area are in a minority, for instance, and do not have representation, or at least their voices aren't heard on SGB. This is a known matter, and the MEC has conceded to this at least 3 years ago when he spoke about SGB representation. So poor people aren't always adequately represented by SGBs. Surely you'll concede that as well.
Yeah, but you'll also understand that in a democratic country, there's what we call, majority. So in a democratic country, majority will always prevail. So you can't say in a certain school when parents participate in a certain process and they are defeated by the majority, then it becomes an unfair process. It can't be. So that's why I'm saying in any setting where you have your SGB, the SGB will then participate and say, this is what we see. Those that are supposed to be applying for exemption, if they feel that they are not treated fairly, then the department is there to assist. There are officials who are responsible for public ordinary schools who are there to say if the process was unfair, then they intervene. The district officials will also intervene, and in absence of any success, the head office will also assist the parents that are being shortchanged or that are unfairly untreated.
Yeah, okay, that's a fair response, although we do know that administratively it is quite difficult for poor and working class parents to sometimes access these facilities. But I do have a final question for you, which I think speaks to the crux of this matter. Provincial governments are charged with the responsibility of giving subsidies to schools, including private schools. In the Western Cape, for instance, 125 million was given by the provincial government there to private schools in the Western Cape. Do you have any idea what that figure would be in Gauteng? How much money did the Provincial Department of Education in Gauteng give to private schools in Gauteng?
No, I wouldn't have that figure offhand, but I can assure you that there are independent schools that we fund. Because remember, they need to give us their financial statements. They need to account to say, yes, we have so many learners, then this is the amount that we need. Because remember, in education, numbers are quite key. So you give us the figures to say, this is the number of learners that we take care of. Out of this number, then we then calculate on how much is supposed to be providing in terms of subsidy. And that process happens every year. To a certain extent that there are those independent schools that will not want to account in terms of their financial statements, or some they will go and give us fraudulent financial statements and will stop the payment when it becomes a battle. But we do fund the independent schools in Gauteng.
So when the MEC says he wants to do away with the IEB and that should be a national conversation, is he then also saying that that funding should also stop taking place?
No. Funding, remember, the independent schools, they assist us in terms of taking numbers. I mean, capacity, as you will know, that we will not manage probably to take everyone. So that's why we are subsidizing. We are subsidizing because they are assisting us in making sure that the child is in the classroom. So the subsidy, it's not a question of saying because there's no IEP, then there won't be any subsidy. The two, they go parallel. We are saying, let's have one examination, which all of us are writing, because when you go to tertiary institution, they're not saying you come from the public ordinary school, you come from the IEP. They look at your results and then they give you space as what you are providing. And in our public ordinary schools, they also excel even more better than what is happening in the IEP.
So why then don't you apply that same argument to the existence of the IEB? That's to say that they're helping the government with capacity as an examination board, and Umalusi does at the end of the day, take a look at their quality controls mechanisms and make sure that their examinations are up to standard.
No, the feeling is that if we can have one, why we have two?
Capacity. That's what you said.
Not different.
Capacity.
We can have one that is recognized, and we know that this is how we are moving. Everyone is treated equal. Because you are saying, you can't say those that are coming from IEP are better than those that are coming from public ordinary schools. And you can prove to you that they are not. So hence we are saying, let's have one, which will be then assisting us to make sure that at least we have learners that are coming from the same process, that are coming from the same system in this country.
Okay, Steve Mabona, thank you so much for your time and all the best for 2020. We know that the Department of Education across the board had a difficult 2020, and we hope that things do get better in 2021.